The EU has now made it mandatory not only for the super big corporations, but also medium-sized companies to monitor potential human rights violations and environmental impacts along the supply chain. This new legislation is called CSDDD. While the final text of the CSDDD is still being negotiated, companies should waste no time to prepare themselves for this new directive and be ready as soon as they can. Not complying with demanded standards can result in serious penalties. In this short video, we will explain you what the CSDDD is and what it means for businesses. Please stay until the end, where we will give you our top tip on actions that we recommend companies should take immediately. Hi, I'm Björn from Climate Education. We produce videos where we inform you about climate change and empower you to stop this crisis. Ever since it has passed, it has been on every corporation's mind, the CSDDD. These letters stand for Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. In short, the directive aims at ensuring that human rights are protected and environmental impacts are avoided along the supply chain. This might sound obvious, but in fact is often been left to businesses to voluntarily check on these issues. Now, corporations need to make sure with this new legislation they understand the new regulation, get an overview of existing due diligence policies, their value chain, and their existing business partners, and comply with this new legislation and avoid any risk to the business. We will now explain the main points of the CSDDD. What it means for companies from the EU, companies operating within the EU, and businesses along the supply chain. So, what is the CSDDD? Well, easily spoken, again, the 5 letters stand for Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and it's a piece of legislation by the EU. It aims at ensuring that human rights are protected and environmental impacts are avoided along the supply chain. It is important to note that this applies not only to EU but also non-EU companies, including subsidiaries and supply chains. Now, it is very important that companies get ready as soon as they can. They need to understand the new regulation. They need to get an overview of existing due diligence policies, value chain, and existing business partners. And of course, they need to comply with the new legislation to avoid any risk to their businesses. So, what is it exactly that companies need to do? Well, first and foremost, they need to identify potential and actual impacts on the environment and or on human rights. They need to prevent, mitigate, and minimize human rights violations and environmental impacts once they're being identified. And then they need to integrate due diligence duty into company policies. They need to verify that business partners are complying, direct or indirect business partners, with this new regulation. And last but not least, companies need to adopt a climate transition plan to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius as enshrined in the Paris Agreement. So now this is the big question, right? Who does it actually apply to? Well, as I've said, it applies to both European and non-European companies. But that's not all. There are 2 groups. There's Group 1 and Group 2. Group 2 means high-risk sectors, and Group 1 is those who are not in the high-risk sectors. High-risk sectors, well, we're talking about textile industry, agriculture, fisheries, forestry, mining, fossil fuels, minerals, and metals. So who is in Group 1 and Group 2, besides that we know now which industries belong to Group 2? In Group 1, we have the European companies with more than 500 employees and a net sales of more than 150 million euros globally. Non-European companies also with a net turnover of 150 million euros inside the EU, and important to note here, there's no count of employees. Group 2, again, those are the high-risk sector companies. European companies with more than 250 employees and a net sales of more than 40 million euros globally. And again, for non-European companies, it's the same standard, 40 million euros within the EU, but no count on employees. So what you see here is that the threshold for the high-risk sectors in Group 2 is much lower than in Group 1 because, well, obviously, as the word says, the EU sees a high risk here. So even if the net turnover is not as high, those companies are already in scope of this legislation when they generate more than 50 million euros. So when will the CSDDD start? Well, the CSDDD adopted by the EU Parliament in June 2023. And then now we're in the stage that the EU Commission, the EU Parliament, and the EU Council are set to negotiate the final version in 2024. It's likely that a formal deal could be agreed early in 2024. The new directive is then set to enter force in the first half of the same year, 2024. Each member state, and this is very important, as often with the EU, will have to transpose it into their national law. And this implementation, well, it's not set into stone, but it's likely to happen in 2027. So this is important to know, right? If I don't comply, what will happen? So what are the penalties? Well, the CSDDD will transpose into the national law, as we said. So therefore, the enforcement of control and penalties will be handled by national states. Potential penalties include fines of at least 5% of sales and compliance injunctions. So for non-European companies, there's also the risk of exclusion from the European market. So this is very high penalties, I'd say. So it's very, very important that you comply with the law and get ready as soon as you can. So how to get ready, right? So the big advice here is to start preparing as early as you can, as soon as possible, to get ready and implement the new rules. You have to identify first and navigate new and complex risk. It's unlikely the directive will significantly change, so start based on the current draft. Update your codes of conduct, define responsible purchasing policies that integrate the environmental and social vigilance duty, verify corrective action plans properly implemented. So, with all this being said, the CSDDD is set to come. It's a good thing. It protects human rights, it protects the environment, but also it puts a high burden on companies. So now that you get ready, there is the draft, get ready. It's going to happen within this year. And in 2027, it's very likely this will be implemented into national law. So thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, please consider giving a thumbs up, as it really helps to increase the visibility of our channel, and of course on the problems of human rights and climate change, and be happy to have you on board with the next video. Thank you very much.